Basic economics. The economist as scientist. Economics is a field of study with its own unique language and way of thinking. It's important to understand this perspective if you want to truly grasp how the economy works.
I see. Can you explain more about how economists approach the world?
Economists try to study the economy in a scientific way, much like a physicist or biologist would study their respective fields. They develop theories, collect data, and analyze it to verify or refute their hypotheses.
That's interesting. How is this different from other social sciences?
Well, while other social sciences may rely more on qualitative analysis, economists focus on quantitative data and the use of models to understand economic phenomena.
I see. Can you give me an example of how an economist might approach a problem differently than someone in another field?
Sure, let's say we're looking at the issue of unemployment. A sociologist might focus on the social and cultural factors that contribute to it, while an economist would likely use tools like supply and demand, elasticity, and comparative advantage to analyze the problem.
That makes sense. So, the economist's way of thinking is more focused on the underlying economic principles and mechanisms?
Exactly. Economists try to approach problems with a dispassionate, scientific mindset, using models and data to understand how the economy works. This can provide a unique and valuable perspective.
I can see how that would be a useful way of thinking. It sounds like it takes some time to really develop that economist's mindset.
Yes, it does. But with practice and exposure to economic concepts, you can start to see the world through the lens of an economist. It's a skill that takes time to cultivate, but it can be a powerful way of understanding the complexities of the economy. The scientific method, observation, theory, and more observation. Have you ever wondered how economists develop their theories and test them?
No, I haven't really thought about that. How do they do it?
Well, it's a lot like the scientific method used in other fields. It starts with an observation, like when Isaac Newton saw an apple fall from a tree.
Oh, I see. So the observation leads to a theory?
Exactly. Newton's observation of the apple led him to develop a theory of gravity that applies to all objects in the universe.
That's fascinating. How does this process work in economics?
In economics, an economist might observe rapid increases in prices and be inspired to develop a theory of inflation. They might theorize that high inflation is caused by the government printing too much money.
Interesting. How do they test that theory?
To test the theory, the economist would collect and analyze data on prices and money from different countries. If the data showed a strong correlation between money growth and inflation, it would support the theory.
I see. But you mentioned that economists face challenges in conducting experiments. What do you mean by that?
Unlike physicists who can drop objects in a lab, economists can't easily manipulate a nation's monetary policy just to generate data. They have to rely on natural experiments offered by history, like the impact of a war on oil prices. Our first model, the circular flow diagram. The economy is a complex system, but we can simplify our understanding of it using a model called the circular flow diagram.
Okay, I'm interested to learn more. How does this model work?
The circular flow diagram shows how households and firms interact in the economy. Households own the factors of production, like labor, land, and capital, which they sell to firms.
And what do the firms do with these factors of production?
Firms use the factors of production to create goods and services, which they then sell back to the households.
I see, so it's a circular flow of goods, services, and money between households and firms.
Exactly. The inner loop represents the flow of goods and services, while the outer loop represents the flow of money in the form of wages, rent, and profit.
That's really interesting. Can you give me an example of how this circular flow works in practice?
Sure, let's say you have $1 in your wallet. You take that dollar to a coffee shop, like Starbucks, to buy a cup of coffee. That dollar becomes revenue for the firm, which then uses it to pay rent or wages.
Ah, I see. So the dollar keeps circulating through the economy, from households to firms and back again.
Exactly. This circular flow diagram is a simple yet powerful model for understanding the basic organization and interactions within the economy. Our second model, the production possibilities frontier. The production possibilities frontier is a model that economists use to illustrate the trade-offs that an economy faces when producing different goods.
Okay, so what does it show?
Well, let's say an economy can produce two goods, cars and computers. The production possibilities frontier shows the maximum combinations of cars and computers that the economy can produce given its available resources and technology.
I see. Can you give me an example?
Absolutely. If all the economy's resources were devoted to producing cars, it could make 1,000 cars and no computers. If all resources were used to make computers, it could produce 3,000 computers and no cars.
Wow, that's a big difference. What about if the economy tried to produce both?
Good question. The production possibilities frontier shows that the economy could produce 700 cars and 2,000 computers, for example. But it can't produce beyond the frontier. That would be impossible given the scarce resources.
I see. So the frontier represents the most efficient use of resources?
Exactly. Any point on the frontier is considered efficient, meaning the economy can't produce more of one good without producing less of the other. Points inside the frontier are inefficient. Microeconomics and Macroeconomics. Microeconomics is the study of how individual households and firms make decisions and how they interact in specific markets. For example, a microeconomist might study the effects of rent control on housing in New York City.
I see. And what about macroeconomics?
Macroeconomics, on the other hand, is the study of economy-wide phenomena. A macroeconomist might study the effects of borrowing by the federal government or changes in the economy's rate of unemployment.
Wow, that's really interesting. How are microeconomics and macroeconomics related?
Great question. Microeconomics and macroeconomics are closely intertwined. Changes in the overall economy arise from the decisions of millions of individuals, so it's impossible to understand macroeconomic developments without considering the associated microeconomic decisions.
That makes a lot of sense. Can you give me an example of how they're connected?
Sure, let's say a macroeconomist is studying the effect of a cut in the federal income tax on the overall production of goods and services. To analyze this, they need to consider how the tax cut affects the decisions of households about how much to spend on goods and services.
I see, so microeconomic decisions ultimately impact macroeconomic outcomes. That's really fascinating.
Exactly! Even though microeconomics and macroeconomics are distinct fields, they're inherently linked. Understanding both is crucial for a comprehensive understanding of economics.